Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, I bring you 8 true disappearance stories from forgotten Appalachian towns, places left behind by time, where the snow covers more than footsteps, and the wind sometimes carries voices that no longer belong to the living. These are not ghost stories. These are the echoes of those who vanished, and the traces they left behind. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing, and if you have a story of your own, share it in the comments below. I truly want to hear what's haunted your steps, what you've seen beyond the edge of the map. Now, step softly. The towns remember. It was early January, brittle cold and still. When I arrived in Cold Hollow, the road up had been a gamble, snow thick as sleep. Phone signal dead since Richwood, and no other cars for miles. But I had my reasons. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm 28, a local historian for the West Virginia Archives and History Commission. My grandmother used to whisper stories about Cold Hollow after her third glass of blackberry wine. Said it disappeared one winter night in 1947, taking every man, woman, and child with it. I used to chalk it up to folklore. Then I found the town on a forgotten coal route map, a place that shouldn't be there anymore, and couldn't help myself. The snow here doesn't move right. I noticed that first, before I even made it past the last rusted road sign. It doesn't crunch. It sinks, soft and slow, like it's swallowing your weight. No birds, no wind, not even the groan of branches, just the tireless hush of snow, and the sense that something remembers. The only marker was an old milepost leaning against a fence of splintered wood. I parked beside a rusted-out school bus, overtaken by vines, and took my first steps into what used to be the heart of town. It was all still there, in a way. Weather-worn homes with collapsed porches, skeletal telephone lines, and the blackened shell of a coal plant in the distance, all frozen in decay. But no footprints, not even animal tracks. It was as if the snow had fallen perfectly still and then hardened, preserving everything in a brittle glaze. The first odd thing I saw was a wind chime, thin glass, blue and amber, hanging from an old hickory tree in the center of town. It rang. Softly, clearly. I turned to see if a breeze had passed me, but my scarf hung limp and untouched. The air hadn't stirred. I started taking notes, snapping pictures for my records. But something felt off. Each time I turned my back on a house, I thought I heard something just behind me. Not footsteps, nothing that obvious, but a shuffle, a breath, maybe a sigh. At first, I wrote it off as paranoia, the mind filling the silence with imagined sounds. But it grew bolder. I passed the shell of an old bakery and froze. From within, I heard it, my name. Sarah. Whispered. Faint, but unmistakable. It didn't come from a direction. It was just near. I told myself I was tired. That long drive had frayed my senses. But I started walking faster, noting only the most vital details. The town seemed larger than the map suggested, rows of houses that weren't documented. An alleyway that curved inward where the layout should have ended. I checked my notebook to confirm. The pages were blank. Every word I'd written since arrival was gone. My pen still worked, the ink still fresh, but the notes had vanished. I should have turned back. Any sane person would have. But something pulled at me, not just curiosity, but something older, like the feeling you get when someone calls your name and you haven't heard it in years. I passed a church, half collapsed. Stained glass shattered into the snow like frozen confetti. There were no pews, only dust and a wooden cross laid face down on the floor. A draft whispered through, but nothing moved. I kept hearing it. Sarah. Always behind me, never ahead. I tried recording the sound. My voice recorder crackled with static the moment I pressed record. Even though the batteries were fresh that morning, I played it back anyway. Through the static, buried deep, was something else, another voice, layered, distorted. Not mine, it said. She's here. I dropped the recorder. The longer I stayed, the stranger the town became. Doors I'd passed before were now open. A child's toy, a wooden spinning top, appeared on the porch of a house that had been bare moments earlier. I hadn't seen anyone, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I checked my compass out of habit, even though I hadn't strayed far from the center. It spun wildly, pointing nowhere or everywhere. I checked it again 5 minutes later. Now it pointed at me. I found a journal near what used to be the post office. Just one page remained. No date, just 3 words, written in a child's hand. Don't hear her. I closed the book and looked up. The wind chime rang again, and for the first time, I realized it wasn't just sound, it was signaling. A pattern. A code. Maybe. I stood beneath it for a long time, listening. The whispers have grown louder now. I hear them even when I plug my ears. They're not coming from the houses anymore. They're coming from the snow, from beneath it. I'm no longer sure this town ever meant to be found. I didn't sleep. I made camp in the shell of what used to be the cold, hollow general store walls, half standing. Roof partially caved. Shelves still holding cans from another century. I thought staying inside might muffle the sounds. It didn't. The whispers came stronger, pressing in like breath on glass. Every few minutes, the voice my name again and again, drawn out like the start of a lullaby. I tried repeating to myself that no one was here, but I knew something was. At some point in the night, I saw lights. Not electric, no wires here were live. It was like a shimmer, almost candlelight, moving in the windows of the town hall across the square. I watched it for a long time, unsure whether to investigate or hide. I chose wrong. As I stepped onto the snow, I felt the difference immediately. It was warm, not hot, not even comfortable, but warm enough to make me recoil. The snow hadn't melted. It simply wasn't cold. It felt wrong, like stepping into breath. Inside the town hall, there was no light anymore. Just old documents moldered to stone and a desk overturned in the corner. But something had been there. The dust was disturbed, a trail of it leading into a hole in the floorboards. I knelt and I saw something glinting. It was a necklace, half buried in dirt. My mother had one like it. Same crooked cross, same cracked pearl. I pocketed it without thinking. That was the moment I started to forget why I came. I retraced my steps out of the building, but the snow didn't match my footprints anymore, where I'd walked just minutes before. There were no impressions. Worse, there were new ones, leading beside me, the size of a child's. Tiny, perfect steps that didn't press deep, as if made by something weightless. I followed them to the edge of the square and stopped when I saw the tree again, the one with the chimes. They weren't ringing now. They were still. And that was the most terrifying moment yet, because it meant whatever made them sing wasn't near. I went back to the center to get my bearings, but the compass was dead. My phone was dead. Even my watch had stopped at 4:47 p.m., the exact moment I first heard the voice. I sat down on a broken bench and tried to breathe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. Not watched, surrounded. The buildings didn't seem abandoned anymore. They seemed quiet, expectant. I remember whispering aloud, "What do you want?" And something whispered back, "To remember." The snow began to fall again, fine and steady, but it didn't land on me. It avoided me like I was something it no longer recognized. That was when I realized I hadn't seen my reflection once since I arrived. Not in windows, not in the glass of my thermos. Nowhere. I ran to the school bus where I'd parked, hoping to see the mirror. But the vehicle was gone. Not stolen, just never there. The road had vanished too. Only woods now. Only trees, thick and still. I tried screaming, calling for help, but the air swallowed my voice. It was like screaming underwater. Even my breath seemed muffled, like sound itself had grown heavy. I saw something then, figures, faint, moving between the houses, not walking, gliding, like the wind had shaped itself into memory. They weren't hostile, but they weren't lost either. They knew this place. They were this place. I ran toward the tree, toward the chime, the only thing I still recognized. It rang once as I approached, and suddenly everything stopped. The snow, the sound, even the cold. A pressure fell over me like being underwater, and I felt myself sinking, not physically, but into something else. Memory, time. I saw flashes, families boarding up windows, miners in soot-streaked coats, a woman screaming her child's name in a storm. Then darkness, then only the wind chime, turning on its own. When I woke, I was standing in the center of town again. No idea how I got there. But this time, I wasn't alone. A girl stood across from me, 8, maybe 9 years old, brown coat, eyes like mine. She held out a paper to me, a map, hand-drawn, cold hollow, marked with an X in the center, beneath it, a name, Sarah Jenkins. She said nothing, just pointed to the tree. I approached it once more, slower this time, at its base, where the roots split the snow. There was a second wind chime, not glass, this one made of teeth. Small, human. I dropped the paper and backed away, but the girl was gone. The sky had begun to darken. I felt the same sensation again, my name being pulled from the air, not spoken, but unraveled, as if I were being rewritten, or remembered differently. I no longer know how long I've been here. The days don't pass, the sun doesn't rise. I try to write, but the words vanish. I try to leave, but the path only leads back. The wind chime rings each night at 4:47. I've started hearing other names now, some I know. Most I don't. I think the town is waiting. Not for rescue, but for the rest of its story to be remembered. If you find this, turn back. Don't follow the snow. Don't answer your name. Cold Hollow doesn't take visitors. It keeps historians. The first time I saw the town, I thought it was a cemetery. Dozens of stone figures lined the roadside, staring out from beneath skeletal trees. But they weren't headstones. They were statues, men, women, even children frozen mid-stride, expressions caught between sorrow and surprise. My name is Emily Harris. I'm 27, a sculptor from Roanoke. I came to Blackwater looking for inspiration. It's not on most maps anymore. But an old mentor once mentioned it in passing a town of stone and silence where people supposedly turned into statues. I thought it was folklore. I thought wrong. The road into Blackwater was barely there, choked by weeds and frostbitten roots. My car struggled for traction as I crawled through the outskirts, past rusted signs and broken gas lamps that hadn't worked in decades. I parked beside a crumbling church and stepped out into the cold. The air was strange still and sharp, like it held a secret. I pulled my scarf tighter and walked toward the square. The buildings were mostly intact: a general store, a diner, a post office. But it was the figures that stole my attention. They were everywhere. Every face carved in detail so intricate it felt impossible creases, lashes, the weight of expression captured like breath held in stone. Some looked terrified, some at peace, others mid-conversation with mouths slightly parted. One had her hand outstretched, as if waving goodbye. Another leaned against a wall, eyes half-lidded like he'd just heard bad news. And in the center of it all stood a statue unlike the rest, a young woman clutching a withered flower, her gaze fixed to the heavens. She didn't look carved. She looked arrested, as if she'd once been living. I touched the stone, expecting the coarse cold of weathered marble, but it was warm, slightly, just enough to jolt my breath. I pulled back. My gloves felt damp, though the air was dry. I looked up, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on me, even if they were only stone. I told myself it was artistry, that someone had come here before me and left behind their masterpiece. But who, and why, and how? I set up camp in the mayor's old house. Its roof was intact, the walls dry, and the furniture still upright, though blanketed in dust. I kept the fireplace going and documented the statues by daylight. At night, I sketched, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my skin. Not malevolent, just persistent, watching, measuring, like something was waiting for me to blink. On the third night, I noticed something impossible. The statue of the man outside the diner he'd shifted. Just slightly, his chin, which had tilted down in sorrow, now seemed raised. The lines in his brow were softer. I checked my photos to confirm. The difference was subtle, but it was there. I tried to rationalize it: light, angle, the tricks our brains play. But in the next few days, it kept happening. Their poses didn't change, not fully, but their expressions did, under the moonlight. Everything felt more vivid. The stone gleamed with a strange translucence, like the surface of frozen water. And the faces, they moved, not in full motion, but just enough to unsettle. A smile where there'd been none. A furrowed brow smoothing itself out. It didn't happen all at once, only under moonlight. Only when I wasn't looking directly. That's when the whispers began. Faint, barely audible. They came with the wind, riding the edges of sound like breath through teeth. I thought it was my mind playing tricks, residual stress, exhaustion, too much time alone with art that watched me back. But then I started hearing words. Stay, remember? She's almost here. I checked my recorder the next morning. It had captured nothing but static. Except once, for 2 seconds. A voice whispered Emily. I began sculpting again at first to calm myself, to find focus. But something changed in my work. I wasn't sketching from memory anymore. I was replicating the faces in town, down to the exact line and wrinkle, even if I hadn't studied them up close. I'd wake from half-sleep and find my hands smeared with clay, a new bust half-formed in my lap. And every time I sculpted, I felt closer to them, not the statues, the people they used to be. One evening, just before dusk, I caught a glimpse of movement outside the window. A figure, not walking, but standing perfectly still near the well. I grabbed my coat and ran outside. It was the girl with the flower, but she was turned now, looking toward me, her lips slightly parted. As I stepped closer, her expression shifted so subtly it might have been my breath catching in the cold. But I swear I saw her blink. I ran back to the house and locked the door. I should have left. I packed my things that night. But something stopped me. The whispers grew louder. The eyes followed more intently. I looked at the statue again through the window, and for the first time, I felt a pull. Not fear, not entirely. It was a feeling like recognition. And then, just before midnight, I found a new sculpture inside the foyer, one I hadn't made, one that hadn't been there before. It was me. At first, I refused to believe it. The sculpture was flawless, every detail of my face, the slight arch of my brow, the old scar near my chin, my exact features, captured in stone I had never touched. I stood there, heart pounding, breath tight, unsure if I was dreaming or beginning to lose myself. I reached out and touched the cheek of the statue. It was smooth, slightly warm. It shouldn't have been. I searched the house from top to bottom, calling out into the empty halls, convinced someone had followed me here. But there was no one. Just the creak of old beams and the whisper of wind through shattered glass. I looked back at the statue again. The eyes were slightly different now, deeper set, more mournful. And I realized then, with a cold certainty, that I hadn't carved it. But maybe I had been carving toward it all along. The next morning, the statue was gone. No drag marks, no fragments, just a patch of disturbed dust where it had stood. I ran outside. The town was colder now, the kind of cold that sinks into the bones and hums against your ribs. The sky hung low, the color of old ash. The faces in the street had shifted again. The girl with the flower was now glancing over her shoulder. A man by the well raised his hand in an unfinished wave. I stood frozen. It wasn't imagination. They were changing, responding. I thought about leaving. I even packed my things a second time. But I couldn't make it past the edge of town. The road had collapsed behind me, not physically, but perceptually. The trees leaned in ways they hadn't before. And no matter how far I walked, I always returned to the square. I left markers, used my compass, even counted steps. It didn't matter. Black water wouldn't let me go. Not yet. I tried to sleep that night with the fire roaring and the door barricaded, but the whispers returned, no longer faint. She's almost ready. They said, she sees now. I put my hands over my ears, but the voices came from within, like memories I'd forgotten being replayed by someone else. I don't remember getting up, but I found myself standing in the square at midnight, barefoot in the snow, staring at the statue of the girl. She was crying now. two thin lines carved into her cheeks. I turned and saw them all. Every face turned toward me. I screamed, or tried to. My voice didn't carry. It was as if sound stopped inches from my mouth. The wind had fallen still again, the kind of silence that feels like pressure. That's when I saw something move behind the diner. Not a person, a shadow, tall and hollow-eyed, gliding without sound. It passed between two statues and left behind only stone where its shadow had touched. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the well, landing hard in the snow. When I looked up, it was gone. But something had changed in me. The next morning, I discovered new clay beneath the floorboards. Fine, dark, pliable. I'd never seen this kind before. My hands moved on their own, sculpting without thought. I made faces I didn't recognize until I did. One was my mother. Another was the mentor who first told me about Blackwater. Then the girl with the flower. The shapes came faster, clearer. I couldn't stop. And with every face, I felt lighter, as if I was being emptied. I stopped eating. I didn't feel hunger anymore. I stopped sleeping. Didn't need rest. My reflection in the broken mirror had dulled skin pale, lips colorless, eyes hollow. I knew then I wasn't leaving. Not as I was. The town had chosen me. Or I had answered something that I shouldn't have. I wandered the streets at dusk, no longer fearing the statues. I recognized them, their sorrow, their stillness, and I began to envy it. One night, under the full moon, I saw her again, the girl with the flower. Waiting by the church steps, she turned, slowly, and raised a hand toward me, not beckoning, but inviting. I followed, inside. The altar had collapsed, but a ring of statues stood in its place. All turned inward. In the center was a pedestal, empty. I knew what it meant. I climbed it. I stood still, and the wind died. I heard the voices one last time. Not whispers, now memories. My mother's lullaby, my mentor's lecture, the sound of chisel on stone, the laughter of strangers I once sculpted in my dreams. And then silence. Not emptiness, but fulfillment. A hush like the settling of dust. A stillness like completion. I closed my eyes. If anyone finds this, remember, Blackwater doesn't take people. It preserves them. It sculpts what was lost and keeps it safe in silence. And now, I watch too. It started with a frequency I couldn't trace. I was scanning the dial late one night, testing a salvaged rig from the old Durham estate, when I stumbled on a faint hum nestled just below 94.1. I'm Lisa Carter, 32 part-time mechanic, full-time amateur radio technician, and maybe the last person who still thinks ghosts could be electromagnetic. I'd heard of silver pine before, mostly in static-filled forums and half-redacted FCC reports, a silver mining town buried deep in North Carolina that went quiet after a collapse in 1963. Not just the mine, everything. No survivors, no bodies, just silence. Until now. The signal came in clearer the closer I got to the coordinates. I packed up and drove west, weaving past forest roads that hadn't seen traffic in decades. The mountains around here don't welcome you, they watch. As I neared Silverpine, my rig flared alive with sound. Not music, not even static. A voice, soft, deliberate, slightly distorted. This is Station Echo, broadcasting live from memory. Then silence, mildness, then laughter. not canned or rehearsed. Just a woman laughing somewhere far away, like she'd heard the joke already and never stopped laughing. The town itself was intact, more than I expected. The buildings were grayed out, leaning slightly, but the windows still held glass, and the church steeple still caught the sun. I parked near an old barber shop and stepped out into the quiet. The air had that mined-out metallic edge, like cold iron. I brought my portable receiver and followed the signal to the old broadcast station at the top of a hill just east of town. It looked dead door hanging off the frame, ivy crawling through the brick, but the signal grew louder inside. And when I stepped through the threshold, the rig on my hip began to hiss with voices again. I found the source in the studio booth, a vintage microphone, green with oxidation, resting untouched atop a dusty desk. It should have been lifeless. There was no power, no cables, no backup generator humming in the walls. But when I leaned close, it crackled to life. "Welcome back, Lisa," it said. My name, not recorded, not garbled, spoken in a voice I half recognized. Male, calm, too familiar to dismiss as coincidence. I stood frozen as the silence thickened. I tried recording it. My gear wouldn't take. Tape reels jammed. Batteries flickered empty despite reading full only moments earlier. I took notes by hand, sketching the layout, marking the dials. That's when I noticed the schedule board behind the glass. It still held a paper broadcast log dated February 18th, 1963. The last entry simply read, "Final hour." Below it, someone had scrawled, "The voice never stops if you don't answer." I took a photo. It didn't develop. Not blank, just dark, like the booth swallowed the exposure. That night, I set up camp in what used to be the sheriff's station. I couldn't bring myself to sleep inside the broadcast station. The whispers had started again. Not loud, just a rustle beneath the signal, like wind through wires, murmuring names. I scanned the radio bands again. Same frequency, this time. A dialogue was playing. Two voices, a man and a woman. I couldn't place them, but they were talking like it was a live show. "She's here," the woman said. "She thinks we're echoes." Then static swallowed the rest. The deeper I went into Silver Pine, the more I felt it wasn't abandoned. Doors stood ajar with fresh dust inside. Footsteps echoed behind me in perfect mimicry. Always a second too late, in the old library. I found a book lying open on a table. Not to a story, but to a transcript. A full page of dialogue I'd just heard on the radio. Word for word. My voice included. I hadn't spoken it aloud, but it was there. I checked the microphone again before sundown. This time it was silent, but warm to the touch. It pulsed faintly, like a heart. The schedule had updated on its own. No ink, just impressions pressed into the paper. Live recording, 7:13 p.m. Lisa Carter. Memory trace initiated. That's when I began to doubt what I was hearing, what I was remembering, or if there was a difference anymore. I sat in the booth until dark, not broadcasting, just listening. Occasionally, the microphone would flicker and breathe a few words, childhood stories I'd forgotten. A line from my father's old radio show, a boy I'd kissed in 7th grade behind a school trailer. Each one exact, unmistakable. I wasn't recalling these things. I was being reminded. The line blurred slowly, like frost on a window, melting just enough to show something watching from outside. I couldn't sleep. I left the radio on. At 3:07 a.m., the signal peaked. screeching into a short loop of distorted audio. I replayed it twice before catching it. A phrase, buried under reverb and hiss. Don't let her forget us. Then silence again. That was the first time I saw the reflection. In the station's booth glass, just over my shoulder, a second version of me. No expression, mouth opened slightly as if about to speak. I turned. Nothing there. Silverpine is speaking, or remembering, or both. I don't know yet. But I stayed longer than planned. I stopped keeping track of time. The signal's stronger now. I'm starting to hear it even when the equipment is off. I woke up in the booth with a nosebleed and the microphone pressed against my cheek. No memory of falling asleep. The static had returned, low and insistent, like a breath being held. I sat up slowly, neck stiff, and looked around. Everything was where I left it, except the broadcast log. It now read, "Live, do not exit." The clock on the wall, stopped for days, ticked once and kept going. And I realized the signal hadn't been repeating. It was building. Outside. Silverpine looked different in the morning haze grayer, somehow flatter, as if the edges of buildings had softened. I wandered down to the mine entrance at the town's edge, half buried in rock and rusted signs. Authorized personnel only. One read. Though the rope barrier had long since rotted away, I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. Maybe a reason why the broadcasts never stopped. Maybe silence. I only made it 10 steps in before my radio let out a shriek and cut to silence. Then the microphone's voice came through, not via speaker, but from inside the mine itself. She's getting closer. I staggered back and dropped the radio. It kept hissing, faintly now, as if embarrassed to be caught speaking. I checked my recorder again. The tape ran smooth. But when I rewound and played it, I heard a voice overlaying my own field notes. It was me talking in calm, radio cadence, saying things I never remembered saying. We are the memory. We are the echo. Tune in before you forget. I played it again. The words changed. Stay with us, Lisa. You belong to the silence. Back in the station, I shut every window, sealed every door, and tried broadcasting on a fresh reel. I introduced myself. I spoke into the void. And the void answered. Not in words, but in soundscapes. A hallway I hadn't walked since I was 10. My mother's laugh. The hum of my grandfather's generator during summer storms. Every memory delivered in perfect fidelity, layered beneath my voice like a score. I pulled off my headset and looked at my hands. They were trembling not with fear, but recognition. The microphone pulsed again. Warmer now. I stared into it, waiting. This time, a new voice female. Soft. Detached trace complete. Subject archived. Then a deep click, like a real ending. I checked the board. A new name appeared. Lisa Carter, recorded. I wiped it off with my sleeve. It smeared, like soot. The smell of ozone filled the air. I stumbled outside to clear my head and found the sheriff's station door wide open. I hadn't left it that way. And someone had drawn concentric circles in the frost across the windshield of my car. I tried to leave that afternoon. I really did. But the road out twisted into itself like a looped ribbon, returning me to the square each time. I even used GPS. But the map reset constantly, blinking my location as undefined. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the radio, letting it wash over me. Around 2:00 a.m., I heard my voice again, but younger, 16, maybe, crying, saying a name I haven't said in years. Then the older voice. She remembers now. I went to the old school building the next morning. Unsure why. Inside. The walls were covered in broadcast transcripts, hundreds of them, yellowed and curling. Each page had a name and a time, and I recognized every one. Some were dead, some missing, some I'd only read about in forums. I flipped to the last page. It had my name, my arrival time. Beneath it, final message pending. I turned around slowly and saw a reel recorder spinning. I hadn't pressed play, but it was already recording. That afternoon, I smashed the microphone. I took a hammer to it until it broke apart in shards of copper and black enamel. I screamed into the silence, but nothing echoed back. I thought it was over. Then the speaker crackled on its own, and a voice, dry and distant, said, "You cannot silence a memory that still listens." I ran, out into the woods, past the mine, into the tree line. But the sound followed. The static, the hum, even the old jingles from 1963 ads I'd never heard before. I covered my ears. I kept running. When I woke again, I was back in the booth. The station smelled of burnt ozone and soil. My hands were clean, my equipment gone. Only the reel-to-reel machine sat before me, slowly spinning. I pressed play. It was me, narrating everything, right up to the present moment. The voice was clear, confident, almost professional. But it wasn't me anymore. If you're hearing this broadcast, then you've found Silver Pine, and you've stayed too long. The signal doesn't call out at records. Every voice, every story, every forgotten name. It's not a haunting. It's a station that never shut off, and I'm part of it now. Another voice in the snow. "Don't trust anything that moves after dark," the old man said, handing me the rusted key. His eyes were glassy with age, but steady. They ain't people anymore. I took the key anyway. My name's Daniel Reed. I'm 45, a veterinary doctor from Charleston. I wasn't here for ghost stories or broken folklore. I came because the state asked me to examine some livestock corpses near the old quarantine perimeter in Ravens Hollow, West Virginia. No one had lived there since the plague swept through in '89, or so they claimed. The town was cordoned off after the last evacuation, 14 dead in 3 days. No clear infection vector, no cure. Officials blamed a mutated strain of something fungal, but that never explained why the bodies were found with no visible wounds. Eyes wide open, pupils blown, or why the clocks in every single home had stopped at 9:16 p.m. I was told the area had been sterilized, cleared, forgotten, but the state still sent me in, just to confirm. The road into Ravens Hollow cut through black firs and silence. As I passed the old warning signs, my cell signal vanished. No surprise. I kept going until the first roof lines crested above the treetops. It looked like a snapshot of a town, mid-breath cars still in driveways. Mailboxes rusted shut with years of unopened letters. I parked near a church whose bell tower leaned east like it was bowing. As I stepped out, I noticed something odd. The silence here wasn't natural. It was held. I started with the farmhouse where the animals were reported. 3 sheep, 1 dog, all found curled in unnatural poses. No wounds, no sign of struggle. I examined the remains' muscle tissue intact, organs seemingly frozen mid-function. It was like their systems had simply stopped. My instruments flickered erratically. Thermometer readings jumped by 15 degrees in seconds. My flashlight, though fresh with batteries, dimmed whenever I pointed it toward the woods. That night, I stayed in the old town hall. It still had power from an emergency generator, but I kept it off. Something about artificial light here felt intrusive, like it might draw attention. I lay on a cot, notes scattered around me, trying to make sense of the biology. That's when I heard it. Shuffling. Not footsteps, no weight to them, just movement, like something brushing against the outside of the building. I held my breath. The noise passed, then returned on the opposite wall. Always circling, never knocking. I ventured out with a thermal scope at dawn. The sun hadn't yet breached the ridge, and mist still clung to the roads. I caught something on the scope near the library, tall, human-shaped, but cold. Dead cold. It moved slowly, like it was remembering how to walk. I lowered the scope. Nothing was there. I scanned again. It was gone, but the scope now read my body temperature as 0. Later that day, I found the first clock, inside a 2-story house near the playground. It had stopped at 9:16 like the others, but beneath it, drawn in ash across the kitchen floor, was a symbol I didn't recognize, a circle divided by a jagged cross. I touched it lightly with my boot, and the air shifted, like pressure dropping before a storm. The radio on the counter clicked on. Static. Then a voice. "Don't sleep here." Daniel. It wasn't a recording. It was a warning. I tried to rationalize everything. Fungal toxins, lingering spores, neurological hallucinations. But then the dog corpse I had examined earlier, its eyes were open now. They'd been sealed when I left, and the body had moved 3 feet from where I'd placed it. I checked for drag marks. Nothing. I watched the footage from my trail camera. One frame showed the dog sitting upright. The next, gone. That night, the shadows returned. I don't mean silhouettes. I mean forms that shouldn't exist. They moved without light, crawling along surfaces, stretching between walls. One passed over my chest as I lay frozen in the cot, and I felt everything go cold inside. Not pain absence, like something had reached through and plucked out a memory I hadn't chosen to give. I stayed perfectly still until the shape withdrew through the door. I considered running then, leaving everything. But I needed to know. I needed to see what happened to this place. I found a journal in the schoolhouse the next morning. The final entry read, "The dark isn't what killed us. It's what remembered us too well." There were no names in the book, just drawings of faces I didn't recognize, but one of them looked like me. I hadn't been here before. At least, I didn't think so. I haven't slept in over 30 hours. The clocks have started ticking again, but only when I'm near. They stop the moment I leave. The figures appear more often now, always from the woods, always at the edge of things. I can't tell if I'm awake or not. I whisper questions into the air, and sometimes something whispers back. I found my own handwriting in a house I don't remember entering. A note pinned to a child's bedroom wall. Beneath drawings of trees and teeth. "Don't forget what's real. Daniel." The ink was mine. The slant. The pressure exactly how I print when I'm trying to stay calm. But I have no memory of writing it. The bed in the room was made. Dustless. As if someone had just risen from it moments before. I backed out of the room and shut the door, careful not to disturb the air. The animals have gone. I returned to the barn where the corpses had been stored, and the space was empty. No tracks, no scent, only a lingering cold that clung to the tools like breath frozen midair. I followed what I thought were hoof prints through the orchard, only to realize they were reversed impressions leading toward the barn. Not away. Each print clearer than the last, like whatever made them had grown heavier over time. At the end of the trail, nothing. Just the old swing swaying without wind. By the third day, I stopped trusting the sun. It rose too fast, burned too white, then vanished behind clouds that never moved. Time became a loop. I'd find myself back at the church, even after heading east for hours. My compass spun, my watch stopped, and every time I looked at the clock tower, it read 9:16. I tried smashing it. The hands reset the moment I blinked. I screamed into the empty streets and heard it echo twice, once naturally. Once. Delayed. That night, I heard breathing in the walls. Long. Measured inhalations, like lungs that hadn't worked in decades were trying again. I pressed my ear to the wood and felt the pulse of something steady, alive. When I stepped away, the wallpaper rippled, like something behind it was shifting position. I left the building immediately and walked without stopping until I reached the edge of the cemetery. The gates were open. They hadn't been before. Inside, the gravestones had changed. Names I recognized from the plague records were replaced. Every stone now bore a date, 9:16 p.m. February 3rd, 1989, and a blank name. Except one, Reed, Daniel. It wasn't aged or cracked like the others. It looked newly carved. Beneath my name was a phrase etched in strange. Perfect lettering, the sleep that walks behind. I touched the stone. It was warm. I ran until I collapsed in the woods. The shadows followed. Not fast, just present. I'd glance over my shoulder and see them standing still, shoulder to shoulder, just past the trees. Always closer than they had been. One leaned forward once, and I saw its face, not a face. Exactly. But the absence of one. A silhouette of a man, features sunken inward like the void had worn him like skin. And then it whispered, not aloud, but inside my skull. You stayed. By then, I'd stopped trusting my own mind. I found teeth in my coat pocket. Not mine. Small, milk white, childlike. The journal I'd been keeping now contained entries I never wrote. Pages dated before I arrived. And ink in a hand that mimicked my own. It detailed events I hadn't yet lived. Moments I hadn't yet seen. I tried tearing the pages out. They reappeared by morning, doubled. As if the town wanted me to remember something, even it couldn't forget. On my final night, I went back to the town hall. The generator wouldn't start. The building was darker than it had ever been. I stood in the center room where the plague meetings had once been held and waited. At 9:16, the lights flickered on. Every shadow in the room detached from its wall and stood upright. Dozens, all surrounding me. They didn't speak, but they breathed. Slowly, together. I stepped into the center of them. Not out of bravery, just surrender. I felt their presence pass through me like a cold exhale. My limbs numbed, my vision tunneled, and I remembered something I never should have forgotten I'd been here before. Not in body, but in dreams. I'd seen this moment, this silence, this suffocating weight of being observed by things that wore my shape. In the dark. And I had always woken up before the end. Until now. If you're hearing this, or reading it, or dreaming it, know this Raven's Hollow never needed plague to kill its people. It only needed memory. These things, these shadows, they are not ghosts. They are recollections. The town remembers too much, too clearly. And if you stay long enough, it remembers you back into itself. I am still here. I don't know if I'm awake or not. I don't know if I'm speaking aloud or just echoing inside someone else's skull. But the clocks have started again. And it's always 9:16. I didn't come to Dusty Ridge looking for ghosts. I came for a story. My name's Michael Owens. I'm 40, a freelance investigative journalist who spent the last decade chasing strange headlines and local lore from the Tennessee backwoods to the corners of Kentucky coal towns. Dusty Ridge was one of those places whispered about in road stop diners and church basements. People spoke of it like a curse, like something left to rot for good reason. No one officially listed it as abandoned. Yet no census included it after 1994. It was as if the place had vanished sideways. Not all at once, but quietly, family by family. The drive up was all dirt switchbacks and branches, too eager to scrape my windows. No signs, no mile markers, just a soft pressure in my ears, like the mountain wanted silence. I pulled into what used to be a main street, a post office, shuttered diner, and 4 or 5 homes slumped against the horizon like they were caught mid-exhale. The buildings looked half asleep. Dust drifted in the air without motion, as if stirred by breath rather than wind. I stepped out of the car and immediately felt watched, not by eyes, but by memory itself. I started walking the perimeter of town, taking photos and jotting down notes. The place had been untouched for years, maybe decades. Yet I kept finding fresh signs. A curtain swayed in the breeze. A door creaked open, then stilled as if surprised. And always, the whispers. Not loud, not even clear. Just fragment syllables that teased meaning. I'd hear something like "he left" or "don't look back," carried in the dry wind, and always thought it was just my imagination. Until I realized it wasn't always my name I was hearing. Sometimes it was my voice. I made camp in the old church. The roof was mostly intact, and it felt safer being surrounded by thick walls and pews than alone in my car. That night, I read through a diary I found tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the post office. Its last few pages had been torn out, but the ones that remained were unsettling enough. Names were listed one after another, dozens of them all last names only. Beside each one, a word. Taken, gone, hollow. And on the back cover, scrawled in pencil, nearly worn away, "They come for the forgotten first." I left the church around midnight when I heard the bell toll. It shouldn't have. The rope was gone. The bell rusted through its frame, but the sound rang out anyway, one clear note. I followed it to the ridge's edge where the land dropped off sharply into dense forest. I stood there, breath clouding, unsure why I felt so afraid. That's when I saw them shapes in the trees, tall and still, not hiding, just waiting. Their silhouettes didn't shift with the wind. They weren't people. Just outlines where people had been remembered too long. Back at the church, I found the diary torn apart. Pages shredded, ink bleeding into the floorboards. My recorder was still running, but the audio had changed. Instead of my notes, it was looping whispers. "You came to listen. So listen." I tried to sleep but couldn't. The whispers seeped through walls. They told stories, horrible ones. A mother who walked into the woods with her child and returned with neither face. A boy who found his own name carved into the well stones before he vanished. I started to lose track of time. Days blended. My watch stopped. The sun never fully rose, just lingered in a pale gray that hovered like indecision. I checked my compass, spun wildly. I tried drawing a map of the town, but every building shifted positions. When I looked away, the post office moved. The church door changed angles. The only thing that remained constant was the whispering. It didn't grow louder. It just grew closer. On the fourth day, I found a photograph pinned inside the sheriff's station. It was a group-shot residence of Dusty Ridge lined up in front of the general store. But something was off. Every face was blurred, not by damage, but by intent. As if someone had erased identity from memory itself. Except one figure near the back. A man standing alone, his face turned directly toward the lens. His expression wasn't blank. It was pleading. That night I heard my name again. Not whispered, spoken, clear and low, and from behind me. Though no one was there, I turned and saw movement near the ridge. I followed it until I reached the well. The same well from the story. A name was carved into the stones, Owens. My chest tightened. I don't know who carved it or when, but the letters were fresh, like they hadn't been here the day before. I don't know how long I've been here now. The whispers are always near, sometimes inside the walls, sometimes in my dreams. Sometimes they mimic people I knew. My mother's voice asking if I remember how the fire started. My own voice telling me I've already been forgotten. I tried leaving. The road turned to fog, and when I circled back, the town looked a little different. Fewer buildings, fewer places to hide. The town isn't decaying, it's retreating. Each day I wake to fewer buildings, fewer landmarks. Like memory itself is folding inward. I found the diner gone this morning, just a patch of frost where its steps had been. No rubble, no sign it had ever stood there. I checked my notes from day one, and even the photograph I took of its facade has blurred. As if the place never let itself be captured too clearly. What remains is the church, the post office, and the well. Everything else, dust. I tried recording the whispers again, but every time I play them back, the tape runs silent, except for one phrase that always repeats at the end. Even on blank reels, you're almost gone. Not said with menace, just inevitability, like an obituary read aloud before the heart stops. My name appears now in strange places, scratched into the bark of trees, etched into glass, whispered from cracks in the earth. I caught a glimpse of myself in a window and didn't recognize the reflection. The mouth moved before mine did. I began following the voices during the day, trying to find their source. They wind through buildings like wind through reeds, never direct, always echoing. I mapped them for hours. The paths crossed again and again at the well. I stood over it, flashlight in hand, and dropped a rock. No sound, no splash. Just silence so heavy it made my ears ring. I leaned closer and thought I heard laughter, not cruel, but tired, like someone who had been waiting a long time to be heard. I made the mistake of speaking to them. One night, just before the last sliver of dusk vanished, I asked, "What do you want?" The air shifted, the wind stopped. And a chorus replied, not in unison, but layered like overlapping memories. "We want to be remembered." The next morning, the church pews were full, not with people but outlines, impressions where people once sat. Shadows shaped like bodies, unmoving, facing the altar. At the front, a pulpit had appeared. Upon it, a torn diary page, my name, again, written in fresh ink. Below it, you were always here. I've stopped eating, not by choice, but because food no longer has taste. Water doesn't quench. The physical world is unraveling in pieces around me. I watched my own shadow split in two one evening and move separately from me for a full minute before fading. The sun hasn't returned. The gray above is endless, and the moon, when it shows, seems closer than it should. Wrong in shape. I walked 5 miles east yesterday and still came back to the well. My boot prints were already there. Something is building toward a conclusion. I feel it in my bones, in the soft pressure behind my eyes. The voices are clearer now. They speak in memories, not words. My 3rd birthday, my father's funeral, the first time I lied to someone I loved. I don't know how they have these moments. I only know they don't belong to me anymore. I've begun to forget names, friends, family, even my own. Tonight, I found the church completely empty. Even the pew shadows had gone. But on the wall above the altar, in soot and ash, was scrawled a message, "Whispers remember what people forget." I stood there until the floor creaked beneath me, not from rot, but from something rising beneath the boards. I heard my own voice repeating the stories I'd written down, as if someone or something was rehearsing them. I tried burning the diary. The pages screamed, not with sound, but with sudden wind that blew the fire sideways. The flames died instantly, and the pages were unharmed. Now, when I flip through, they tell stories I haven't lived. Yet, a man kneeling at the well, a voice speaking his last word into stone. Owens. Beneath that taken, I no longer believe I came here to uncover a story. I think I came back to one I'd already lived. Dusty Ridge doesn't haunt. It collects. It whispers not to scare, but to preserve. Everyone here was forgotten, not just by people, but by time. And now, I think, they've chosen me to remember them, to become the story that never ends. If you find this town, do not linger, do not listen, do not speak your name, because the moment you do, it isn't yours anymore. It belongs to the ridge, and the ridge never lets go. The lighthouse shouldn't exist, not here, not in the thick interior woods of North Carolina, 30 miles from the nearest river, and even further from any coast. My name's Clara Bennett, 34 archaeologist by trade and reluctant mystic by necessity. I was following an old trail of indigenous legends and Civil War maps when I found the mention, "the light that never dims," even when forgotten. Hollow's End was barely a footnote in the archives, just one cryptic line. In a land survey dated 1894, Beacon remains active, though fuel gone since spring. I dismissed it, until the compass started pointing inland. The hike was brutal, all twisted laurel and sudden ravines, and my equipment constantly misbehaving. My GPS gave out 2 miles in. The map app froze. Even my backup battery flickered like it was afraid. I followed the compass. It spun wildly until I took one specific path. Then it locked in, pointing true north, always toward the light. And when I crested the final ridge, there it was, a lighthouse, perfectly intact, whitewashed stone rising 50 feet into the forest canopy. Its lens gleamed against the dusk. No road, no dock, no plaque, just standing there, lit. I circled it slowly, recording every angle. No wires, no solar panels, no power source at all. Just the beam, rotating steady, piercing through trees as though fog had followed it inland. I found the door unlocked, old iron hinges groaning in protest as I pushed inside. The air was warm, too warm. I expected the smell of mildew or rot, but the place smelled of metal, candle wax, and something floral. Old jasmine? Maybe. There were no stairs, just a single spiral ramp winding up the tower's core. I ascended carefully, flashlight cutting ahead though I barely needed it. The whole interior pulsed with a low amber glow. About halfway up, I noticed the walls weren't just plaster. They were engraved. Faint lines like runes, but older. Etched so finely I had to run my fingers across them to feel. As I touched one, an overlapping spiral within a compass rose, the light above flared. Just for a second. Long enough to show me my shadow on the opposite wall. Except it wasn't mine. It was facing the wrong way. At the top, the lens room was pristine. Glass, spotless. The Fresnel lens rotated slowly with no engine I could see. I stepped close to the central column, expecting metal or gearwork, but found instead a stone core, pulsing faintly with that same warm light. I reached for my journal, but it was gone. My backpack had unzipped, and the pages were missing. Not torn, removed. I turned, heart thudding. And for just a second, the reflection in the glass didn't move with me. I slept at the base that night. I don't remember falling asleep, just that I woke suddenly, gasping. With my compass spinning so fast the needle was a blur. The lighthouse was still lit, its beam sweeping calmly over the trees. But something had changed. The air felt thicker, the trees quieter. I took out my phone to check the time. It read 11:47 p.m., then blinked out. When it returned, it read 11:47 p.m. again. I watched it do that 6 more times before I turned it off. I returned to the top during the second day, searching for any sign of mechanism or switch, but found none. Instead, I found something carved into the railing. My name. Clara Bennett, scored shallow into the wood in a hand I didn't recognize. Below it, still looking for the end. My knees buckled. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here, and no one should have been here before. I took a picture. The engraving didn't appear in the photo. That evening, I tried leaving. I followed the trail I'd marked with orange tape, but every piece was missing. Not torn or weathered, just gone, as if they'd never been placed. The forest grew darker far too quickly. I circled back to the lighthouse, now my only landmark. The moment I stepped within the light's radius, the chill lifted. My compass stopped spinning. And for just a second, I thought I heard someone else breathing behind me. I stayed awake all night, sitting at the edge of the tree line, watching the beam turn. Sometimes I swear I saw figures in its arc, brief silhouettes against the brush. People, maybe, watching or waiting. Once, I saw a girl, barefoot and pale, standing still in the path. When I stepped toward her, the light passed over her, and she vanished without movement. I told myself I imagined it, that the isolation was getting to me. But the next morning, I found a second compass on the base step. Old brass, its needle was locked, pointing toward the lighthouse. No matter how I turned it, I held it up next to mine. Both now agreed. North was wherever the lighthouse was. And the farther I walked away, the faster the air grew colder and the shadows longer. I should leave. But the light keeps calling. Every night, it pulses brighter. And every morning, something in the forest rearranges. I'm starting to think I didn't find the lighthouse. I think it found me. The forest doesn't behave the same now. The trees lean in strange ways, forming archways that seem familiar even though I've never walked beneath them before. The birds have stopped. The wind no longer reaches this clearing, as if the air is holding its breath. I made another attempt to leave this morning, striking west toward a ridge I'd seen on day one. It should have taken me less than an hour. I walked for 5 and still circled back to the lighthouse. The light greeted me like a returning guest, washing over the trunks in steady rhythm. A beat I now feel in my own pulse. I've begun to hear it, the hum beneath the silence. At first I thought it was tinnitus or stress, but it vibrates through the ground, through the stone base of the tower, resonant and purposeful. It's not a mechanical sound. It's older, like the lighthouse is speaking, not in words, but in memory. Each time the light passes, it brings with it fragment smells I haven't known since childhood, voices from dreams I forgot, the exact rhythm of my mother's handwriting on paper. It's rewriting me in slow pulses, mapping its rhythm over my own. Last night I returned to the lens room. I don't remember climbing the ramp. I simply became aware that I was there, standing in front of the stone core, which now glowed with a deeper hue closer to red than amber. Carvings had deepened in the walls, fresh like wet ink, but already dry. One symbol stood out, a lighthouse drawn upside down, its beam reaching downward into earth rather than up to the sky. Beneath it to guide the buried ones. I reached out to touch it and my hand passed through the wall for a brief second. Not fully, but enough to feel pressure on the other side. I don't know what time means here anymore. My watch resets constantly. It's always 11:47 or 3:13 or some flickering nonsense that won't hold still. The light never dims, not even when I close my eyes. Sometimes I see it behind my lids, tracing the lines of my dreams, casting shadows I can't explain. Last night, I dreamed of a spiral staircase descending beneath the lighthouse, deeper than stone. A child was waiting at the bottom, holding my lost journal. She whispered, "It only shines, so you'll come closer." I found the staircase this morning, hidden behind a false panel in the base, sealed with a rusted latch I'd walked past a dozen times. The steps were narrow, curved, and led down into pitch. I descended for what felt like an hour, but when I checked my phone again, it still read the same time. At the bottom was a chamber, smooth-walled and warm, lit by that same pulsing light. In the center stood a pedestal, and upon it, my journal pages restored, writing legible. Every note I'd lost was there, along with entries I hadn't written yet. My hand trembled as I read. The light shows you your own end, not to warn, but to invite. I should have left then, but I didn't. The light grew stronger, more rhythmic. It matched my heartbeat, then replaced it. I sat down without meaning to. My legs gave in, and I watched as the beam from above bent down into the chamber, illuminating every corner. There were no shadows, not a single one. Just the beam and the pulsing hum and the soft whisper of something ancient moving beneath the floor. Since then, the forest no longer frightens me. It responds. Trees bend aside as I walk. The animals return only when I'm asleep. The beam lights my way even in full daylight. And I think, now, I understand this isn't a lighthouse for ships. It's for souls, for wanderers who step too far beyond the line between memory and place. It doesn't warn of danger, it promises refuge. A constant light in a world where everything else forgets you. I found a final engraving near the lens, one I hadn't seen before. It was etched into the base of the light's core. Beneath old runes, every keeper stays until they are light. I read it 3 times, then looked up into the rotating beam. For the first time, I saw a figure standing in it. A woman. Pale. Still. Her mouth opened slightly and I heard my own voice echo back, not in panic, but peace. She said, "It's your turn. I don't feel hunger anymore. I don't feel tired. The light doesn't hurt my eyes. It warms me, reminds me, anchors me. I've stopped trying to leave. There is no place else to go. Only this lighthouse, this endless forest, and the quiet certainty that I was always meant to arrive here. That perhaps the beam didn't find me at all. I found it. If anyone comes across this, know that Hollow's End is not cursed. It is a sanctuary of memory. For those willing to give themselves to the beam, just follow the compass, the one that always points home. It was supposed to be a quiet week. Just me, the forest, and the dull ache of late October solitude. My name's Tom Miller. I'm 35, a bird hunter by habit more than necessity. I came out to Hollow Creek in eastern Kentucky, chasing reports of a rare thrush citing a foolish obsession. Maybe, but one that gave me something to focus on besides the silence of an empty house back home. The town was long since abandoned, or so I'd read. Coal collapse, flooding, bad roads. The usual slow bleed that took so many places off the map. But I wasn't here for history. I just wanted to hear the call. The first sign that something was wrong came before I even reached the tree line. My gear started glitching. GPS froze. Compass spun for no reason. And then my phone not dead. But strange. The home screen wouldn't unlock unless I held it upside down. Texts scrolled in reverse. I shut it off and decided to trust the maps. The trail into Hollow Creek was narrow, but marked with stone pines and creek beds. Familiar ground. I grew up hiking these woods, or woods like them. But the air here felt different, like it had memory. I set up camp on a ridge just east of the town's crumbled schoolhouse. Roof long gone. Flagpole leaning like a finger pointing away. My dog, Boone, a sharp-eared setter, was restless from the start, kept growling low at the creek bed. Even when nothing moved, I let it slide. First night out's always uneasy, but the sounds started around midnight. Not animals, not wind, just tones, musical, almost, but not in any scale I recognized. It was like someone humming backwards, a tune that looped but never landed. I tried recording them. Useless. Every time I hit record, the devices shut off or played back silence. Boone wouldn't go near the creek after that. Just stood at the edge of the camp staring downhill, whining. The next morning, I found strange marks in the mud along the waterline. Footprints, not boots, not shoes. Bare, long-toed, deep-pressed into the clay, like whoever made them had weight but no warmth. I followed them a few feet before they vanished, not at the end of a trail, but mid-stride. The echoes changed on day 2, became words, soft at first, not full sentences but fragments. Not here, too late, still walking, always carried by the wind, and always from the same direction downstream, where the creek curled out of sight behind a bend of thick laurel. I wandered down that way, Boone close but reluctant, and found a place where the water pooled wider than it should. The stones on the bottom shimmered like metal, and above the pool stood a broken statue. A man, arms open wide, mouth carved in a scream. I reached to touch it, but my fingers tingled before contact. The sound spiked, then so loud, I staggered back. Not volume, pressure. A tone so deep it shook the air, followed by silence so thick I could hear my own heartbeat like thunder. Boone barked twice and bolted. I chased him all the way back to camp. When I arrived, my gear had been moved, not scattered organized. My bag zipped, boots set neatly beside the cot. My journal opened to a page I hadn't written yet. A page that read, "Don't follow the next sound." That night, I didn't sleep. Every hour brought new noises, soft footfalls just beyond the fire's edge, pebbles falling, breathing that wasn't mine. I stopped using the flashlight. It only made the shadows deeper. Around 3:00 a.m., the creek sang again. Louder this time, clearer. A high, sad melody that sounded like mourning or beckoning. Boone didn't bark. He just whined low and crawled under the cot. I held onto his collar like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. By morning, I felt stretched thin, like I'd been listening too long to something not meant to be heard. I hiked back toward the trailhead, thinking maybe I could reset, regroup. But the forest had changed. The path curved differently. Landmarks I'd marked in my GPS had vanished. Even the sun seemed to fall wrong on the trees. At one point, I looked behind me and saw my own tracks filled with water. Still water, not rippling. As if time was losing interest in continuity, I returned to camp, no choice. But when I arrived, Boone was gone. His leash, snapped clean in two, no blood, no struggle, just gone. I called his name until my voice broke. The creek answered with a new echo, my name, drawn out in a near-perfect mimic of my own voice. It didn't repeat. It didn't need to. That evening, I found a second set of footprints around the camp. Larger than mine, deeper, spaced evenly, like someone had paced the perimeter all night while I slept. But I hadn't slept. I was sure of that. Wasn't I? I kept moving, not toward any destination, just away from the creek. But no matter how many miles I thought I put behind me, I'd always hear it again. Not the water itself, but the hum. That strange, low frequency that filled the trees like a tide. Sometimes it dropped to silence mid-step, as if something were pausing to listen. I stopped calling for Boone. The woods felt hungrier each time I said his name, like it was feeding the thing that waited beyond the sound. By the fourth day, the echoes had changed. They no longer mimicked me. They mimicked others. My father's voice, low and disappointed. An old friend who died in a car wreck 10 years ago. Even my own voice from years past, laughing at something long forgotten. They came from different directions. None were loud, just present. Gentle reminders that something here remembered far more than it should. I found the statue again, but it wasn't broken anymore. The stone figure had arms raised in triumph now, and its face was different calm, eyes closed like in prayer. The water around it had gone still, mirror flat, and floating at its base was Boone's collar. Untorn, dry. I reached for it, and the surface broke before my hand touched it. A ripple spread outward, and with it, a new sound emerged, whispering, not carried by wind or water, but vibrating directly inside my head. Come see. Come remember. The next morning, I woke to find a second journal beside mine. Leather-bound. Worn. Same as mine, but aged. Inside. The first few pages matched my own entries. Identical handwriting. But after that, it diverged. Descriptions of paths I hadn't taken yet. Warnings I hadn't heard. The last entry read, "When the creek calls you by name, it's already too late." I tried burning it, but the flames wouldn't catch. The pages were damp cold to the touch, but my fingers came away dry. I stopped checking the compass, stopped trusting the map. The forest had taken those rules away. The light fell strangely, bending in places, casting multiple shadows that moved in opposing directions. I found myself on the ridge again without meaning to. Every time I turned away from the creek, it would find a new way to lure me back through sound, through scent, through memory. It smelled like home once, then like my grandfather's garage, then like Boone's fur after a long hike. Always familiar, always wrong. That night, I dreamed of the water speaking in pulses, its ripples forming words. I stood on its surface as though it were solid, around me. Others stood, two figures I recognized, but couldn't name. Their mouths didn't move, but I could hear their thoughts. You heard it? Now you belong to it. I woke gasping, the sound still echoing in my chest like a second heartbeat. My hands were wet with creek water, but I hadn't left the tent. I made one last attempt to leave, marked trees, set a bearing, moved at a steady pace without looking back. I lasted 2 hours before I saw the statue again. This time it wasn't stone. It was wood, carved, freshly stained, still wet in places. And it wasn't a stranger. It was me, every feature exact, down to the scar above my right brow. I stepped back in horror, tripped over something soft, and found Boone, or what was left of him, fur perfectly intact, eyes open, body cold but not stiff, no wounds. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The forest had taken that too. I buried him in the only dry patch of earth I could find and left the collar around a nearby tree. When I stood up, the echoes greeted me again, soft, almost sympathetic. You stayed. You knew. You always belonged here. I turned back toward camp, but it wasn't there. Nothing was. Just trees, water, and the sound of something walking in time with my steps. I think now the creek isn't a place, but a presence. Something that listens, that remembers, that collects the fragments of those who stay too long. The echoes are what's left after forgetting finishes its work. Not malevolent, just curious, patient. I've started hearing my own thoughts reflected back at me before I think them. My steps feel rehearsed, my movements expected, and every time I try to resist, the creek hums louder, realigning the world around me. If anyone finds this, if echoes can still carry truth, know that Hollow Creek doesn't trap with walls. It uses memory. It makes the familiar feel sacred until it owns your footsteps, until your voice is part of the hum, until every sound you ever made is etched into the trees. I will stay now. I think I always have. My name is Jack Turner. I'm 50 years old, and I don't believe in ghosts. Not really. I spent most of my life as a police detective in Lexington. And if there's one thing I learned from decades of interviewing liars and grief-stricken folks looking for reason in chaos, it's this: people want patterns. They want cause. So when I returned to Gray Hollow, Kentucky, I wasn't looking for spirits. I was looking for closure, for the 37 names still circled in my old case files, the ones that disappeared between October 14th and 17th, 1978, without a single sign of struggle, without so much as a dropped shoe print. I'd been a rookie when the case hit, too green to understand why we were told to stop asking questions, too stubborn to listen. We found empty homes with food still warm on the stove, radios left playing soft hymns. In one house, the TV had burned an image into the screen, a test pattern that wouldn't go away no matter how long we scrubbed. I returned all these years later with more skepticism than faith. But that place, it hadn't changed. The road into town was still cracked and narrow, lined with trees that leaned in too close, like they were whispering warnings. I passed the old blacksmith shop, now overtaken with moss, and the diner with its cracked window still displaying hand-painted letters "Daily Pie" and "Coffee 60 sa manual." The town looked frozen mid-breath. My boots crunched gravel as I made my way toward the square. That's when I saw it out of the corner of my eye. A black cat. It darted between two buildings. Nothing remarkable, maybe, but it paused just long enough to look at me. And I swear to God, it winked. I sat up in the sheriff's old office. Still smelled of rust and paper. My old desk was there, barely standing. I brushed off the dust, set out my files, and began comparing notes with the layout of the town. That night, I heard footsteps outside the door. I opened it, nothing. I thought it might have been an animal, until I found prints in the dirt. Human, barefoot. But the gate was wrong too wide, like someone had forgotten how to walk. The next morning, the black cat was back, sitting on the windowsill, tail curled, watching me with eyes too golden to be natural. I moved toward it. It leapt off, disappeared behind the church, but left something behind: a charm. Simple leather, knotted 3 times, with a small bone threaded through. I picked it up and felt heat pulse through my hand. For a second, I wasn't in the room. I was back in '78, sitting beside my partner at the station, listening to a call come in from Gray Hollow. I dropped the charm, and the moment snapped like glass. I walked the town that day, retracing every report: the playground, rusted and still; the schoolhouse, door ajar, desks perfectly arranged. Every corner I turned. The cat was there on a rooftop, beneath a truck, perched on a fence post, always looking, never moving. I started feeling like I was being led. And then came the first figure. Dusk had settled like ash, and in the street ahead, someone stood facing away. Pale clothes, long arms, unmoving. I called out. No answer. I stepped closer, and it vanished the moment I blinked. I returned to the office to find my papers rearranged. The names of the missing were no longer alphabetical. They were ordered by date, and beneath the last name, someone had written, "Ask her why she stayed." No signature. I spent that night in the office chair, gun on my lap, eyes fixed on the hallway. At 3:11 a.m., the clock stopped ticking. The silence was heavier than sleep. And then I heard my mother's voice, soft and broken. "You were born here." Jack. I hadn't been. That much I knew. But the voice unsettled me more than I care to admit. It came again the next night. From the schoolhouse this time. Different voice. My partner's. He died in 92. You left them. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down, I'd always wondered if I should have fought harder back then. If I should have stayed when the higher-ups told us to shut it down. Then I found the mirror. Hung crooked in the town's barber shop. I passed by and nearly missed it, but there it was, fogged over, cracked down the middle. I leaned in. My reflection stared back, but the town behind me in the glass wasn't the one I stood in. It was brighter, alive, people walking, children laughing. And at the center of the square, a woman with no face, arms open wide, standing exactly where the black cat had sat just the day before. I turned around. No one there. But something changed. The air felt thick, heavy with a kind of expectation, the kind that made your skin itch. I walked back toward the square and saw them figures, drifting. Not ghosts, not illusions. People, or pieces of them, half-formed, flickering at the edges like old film stock. They didn't move toward me. They didn't need to. Just their presence was enough to make me forget how long I'd been standing there. I went back to the office, sat at the desk. The charm was back on the table, even though I'd tossed it behind the church. This time, there was something new carved into the wood. You remember now, so they remember you. The charm sat there like it had never left. I picked it up again, slower this time, half expecting another vision. Instead, the office lights flickered, though there was no electricity, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. Not loud, just present, like a low note vibrating beneath thought. I opened my notebook to jot down the moment, and found a new page, already written. My handwriting. But unfamiliar words you left through the front. But you came back through the hollow. I didn't remember writing it. But I couldn't deny the pen's warmth in my hand. The figures in town grew bolder. By midday, they stood openly in the streets, still hazy, still pale, but clearer than before. They didn't speak, didn't reach. They just observed, as if waiting for something. The black cat followed me again, now never more than a few feet away. It led me to the church. The doors, sealed tight on my first visit, now hung open. Inside, the pews were full, not with people but with clothing. Pressed shirts, shoes, dresses, all arranged, upright, as if the wearers had simply stepped out of them mid-sermon. At the pulpit sat a book, one I recognized, our original missing persons ledger, the one that vanished from archives in '82. It was open to a fresh page, and beside it was a pen still wet with ink. At the top of the page, in a neat, even hand returned. Below that, a single name, Turner, Jack. I stared at it until the sun disappeared from the church windows. When I blinked, the ink had dried, back outside. The streets were silent again. The light had flattened. No shadows, no wind. Only the sense of being somewhere remembered. I stood at the well in the center of town, and there they were again, the drifters. This time, they'd formed a circle around the square. Not close, just enough to make retreat impossible without turning my back. And I couldn't. Every instinct told me not to. I spoke aloud, for the first time in days. What do you want? The answer came not from them, but from within the well. Truth. I leaned over the stone rim. Nothing below, just blackness, so deep it bent the light around it. Then came the voice again. Not the well's, my own. You knew they wouldn't be found. You knew they weren't taken. You saw what stayed. Images rose unbidden in my mind. A lantern dropped. A man stepping into shadow. A woman closing a door that wouldn't open again. None of it familiar, but all of it mine. Like buried memory resurfacing, not with time, but permission. I stumbled back, heart racing, breath shallow. The cat rubbed against my leg, then walked toward the mayor's office. I followed. The building had collapsed decades ago, yet now stood tall. Windows intact, door ajar. Inside, the air was warm, dustless. The walls were lined with photographs, portraits of townsfolk, their names etched in brass. Most were blank-faced. One wasn't. My own face, younger, maybe 23, smiling faintly. Beneath it, Deputy Turner Witness. I sat down in the only chair that hadn't rotted. The desk before me bore carvings, layers upon layers of initials. At the center, a phrase chiseled deep: those who see must stay. Those who stay must guide. I didn't move for hours, maybe more. I lost track of time again. When I finally stood, the photo frames were empty. The only thing left was a mirror propped against the far wall. I looked into it. My reflection was gone. Back in the square, the drifters were closer. Now I could see their faces. Every missing person from the case file. Aged just slightly. Not dead. Not unchanged. Just softened. Like memory made flesh. They nodded as I passed, acknowledging, not welcoming. The town wasn't haunting me. It was waiting for me to finish what I'd started. The final time I saw the cat, it was sitting atop the well. It blinked slowly, then leapt down into the dark. I haven't seen it since, but now, when I stand at the edge of the square, I feel its eyes behind me. The town no longer shifts. It's steady, like it has what it came for. I still don't know if I ever left Gray Hollow the first time. Maybe part of me stayed in 78. Maybe this is what happens when a place remembers you better than you remember yourself. All I know is I've stopped trying to leave. There are no roads now, only the loop of the town, the slow turn of time like a watch rewinding. If you find this, if this version of me still reaches beyond the borders, listen close. Some disappearances aren't mistakes. Some are invitations. And Gray Hollow remembers everyone who accepts.